What in the world is going on between the United States and Israel over the hostage negotiations? A few days ago, Israel made a very generous offer. Secretary of State Tony Blinken said it was an extraordinarily generous offer. You're going to hear that in a moment. But Hamas rejected it. Instead, Hamas said they accepted a deal, but once we saw the details, it had nothing to do with the deal that Israel had agreed to. What in the world is going on? And did the United States just double-cross Israel in those negotiations? Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg with a YouTube exclusive for the Rosenberg Report. I mentioned on the program that I was going to give a little bit more detail than I could on this week's show, and I want to do that right now. Last week, Israel made an offer through the United States and Egypt and Qatar in negotiations that are going on in Cairo to Hamas. And what Israel basically said is, look, we will accept a 6-week temporary ceasefire in Gaza. We will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Some reports said about 700, other reports said it'd be about 1,000. And in return, Israel expects Hamas to release hostages. They could be in a phased, a little bit the first week and a little bit a few weeks later or whatever. But we expect Hamas to give back our hostages, both live hostages, starting with live hostages, and then the bodies of hostages and soldiers that have died. And Hamas will not be given control of Gaza in the future. At first, we heard a lot of news reports that Israel was saying we need at least 40 live Israeli hostages to be released right up front. Then we heard that number was maybe 33. Then we heard that number was 20. I can't tell you exactly what was true because all of these have been unconfirmed speculative media reports and leaks. But what I can say is that Secretary of State Tony Blinken, just a few days ago, praised Israel for giving such a generous offer. Take a look at him describing Israel's offer.
The quickest way to bring this to an end is to get to a ceasefire and the release of hostages. Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly. So we're looking to that, and I'm hopeful that they will make the right decision.
Okay, so there you have it. Blinken described Israel's offer as, quote, extraordinarily generous, unquote. That itself was extraordinarily generous for Blinken to say it. We haven't seen Blinken being that warm and friendly towards Israel in recent weeks. So the offer was amazing, and for some Israelis, they felt conflicted. But given how long, we're now at 7 months in which these hostages have been held since October 7th, there is a lot of pressure on the Israeli government. Please make a deal. Don't surrender, but make a deal to get all of them out, but at least some of them out immediately. And so Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and former opposition leader and former Defense Minister Benny Gantz and the War Cabinet made this offer. On Saturday, All Israel News reported that there were leaks coming out in Arab media that Hamas was ready to accept this deal, and the details would come out later on Saturday afternoon or evening. And then time went by and there was nothing. And then a little while later, I believe it was on Monday, Hamas announced that they have accepted the deal. They have accepted a ceasefire deal. And this became a huge story. As the hours went by, it became clear that actually Hamas had said, yes, we accept a deal that Israel had never offered. That Hamas was saying, we want much more than Israel had agreed to. We're going to give much less than Israel agreed to. And we demand, Hamas was demanding, a permanent end to the war. Israel would completely surrender and withdraw from the Gaza Strip, and that Hamas would be in charge of the Gaza Strip. I mean, so that's a crazy thing, and Israel was not going to say yes to that. Yes, we want our hostages back, but we are not going to surrender to Hamas. But Hamas, in their evil genius, and I say that with the emphasis on the evil, but it's evil genius, they have figured out how to manipulate the American and international media. So they get big headlines. Hamas agrees to the deal. Hamas says yes. Hamas accepts a ceasefire deal. And everybody starts going, and that's why, and it breathes life and optimism, and Israeli hostage families start saying, okay, finally we're there. And then you realize, no, they have not accepted what had been negotiated for days and days and hours and weeks. They had come up with their entirely new plan that Israel had not even seen. Now we're learning that CIA Director Bill Burns, who'd been sent to the region as sort of doing shuttle diplomacy, that Burns actually had read the Hamas version, but didn't pass it along to Israel. The evidence seems to be that the Americans knew that Hamas was saying yes to something Israel hadn't even seen, much less agreed to. There are a lot of people in Israel right now, as well as evangelical, Jewish, other commentators, who are really thinking, what double game is the Biden administration playing right now? Whose side are you on? Israel is your ally. It's a sovereign state. It was attacked. It's fighting back to get hostages. Why is the Biden administration treating Hamas like an ally, or not an even ally, like a real peace partner, like a sovereign state? And why would the U.S. keep from Israel an entirely different deal that Israel hadn't even seen? Why did we not immediately see President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken and CIA Director Burns immediately condemn Hamas for trying to pull a fast one? I don't have answers for that right now. I have some speculation, but let's give a little more time. Let's let a little bit more reporting go on. But what I'm saying is, this is not acceptable. Biden has helped Israel a lot, and we in Israel are very grateful. But this isn't helpful. Biden should be applying maximum pressure on Hamas, and one of the ways to do it, as I mentioned in previous shows and on All Israel News, is to apply maximum pressure on Qatar. Qatar is the intermediary. Egypt is playing sort of the facilitating role, but Qatar is the in direct contact with Hamas. And the top Hamas terror leaders, where do they live? They don't live in a tunnel, in a hole in Gaza. They live in luxury, in multi-million-dollar suites in the capital of Qatar, the tiny Sunni Arab Gulf country, and the capital is Doha. That's where the top Hamas leadership lives. And as I've been saying for months now, Biden needs to pressure the leaders of Qatar to pressure Hamas into releasing these hostages and ending this war and going into exile immediately. Among the ways that Biden could be putting that type of pressure, maximum pressure on Qatar, is to say, if you don't put that type of pressure on, if you don't make an ultimatum to Hamas, then the United States is going to apply serious economic sanctions on Qatar. We're going to arrest Hamas leaders in Qatar. We're going to start making preparations to move the U.S. Central Command headquarters, CENTCOM, and our base that's located just south of Doha in Qatar. We're going to move it to a real, true, friendly Sunni Arab ally in the region. Maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe the United Arab Emirates. Make it clear that the United States, as the world's only superpower, has leverage over Qatar, and make this thing happen. Put the pressure on so Qatar says, enough. Hamas, you're out of options. Now, what did Israel do? It didn't wring its hands, Netanyahu, Gallant, Gantz. They did not say, oh, well, we've been sort of double-crossed and we've been beaten in the media war. What did they do? They finally mobilized more reserve units, and they began sending tanks and troops into Rafah. Now, for about 3 months, Israel has been threatening to send the IDF into Rafah. Rafah is the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip. It's right along the Egyptian border. It's where the Hamas senior leadership and about 4 divisions of Hamas terrorists that remain, that's where they're holed up, in the terror tunnels under and around Rafah. So Israel's been threatening and warning for about 3 months now. We're going in there. We have to, because we have to finish off Hamas once and for all. Now, the United States, under Biden, has been saying, don't do it. It's a red line. We don't want you to do it. We don't see you have a good plan to protect civilians. We want this war to be over. We want a permanent ceasefire. Enough already. And Israel's like, no, we're not going to surrender to Hamas. We need to finish them off. And Israel has waited. They have deferred to President Biden because Biden is an ally, and we want things to work well with Biden. We need ammunition and arms and political cover from the United States. We needed the United States to help us shoot down those 320 Iranian missiles and suicide drones a few weeks ago, right? So Netanyahu and the war cabinet have said, okay, we'll pause. We won't go in. And if the pause can allow for good negotiations to bring out all the hostages, fabulous. But we're not going to surrender. And so when Hamas tried to pull this stunt, you didn't hear all kinds of venting from Israeli leaders. They just started implementing the plan. And now, just in recent hours, the IDF has moved into Rafah. Varying reports say that Israel has moved, some reports say 100,000, other reports say about 200,000 Palestinian civilians out of Rafah to newly set up refugee camp tents with food and water and so forth, ready to go, medical supplies, so that the IDF can move in. And what their first objective was to take this little strip of land between the city of Rafah and the actual Egyptian border. Why? They don't want Palestinian civilians, much less Hamas terrorists, to try to break through the security wall and get into Egypt. That would trigger a huge crisis with Egypt. Also, this is where Israel is concerned that smuggling tunnels are bringing in weapons and other supplies to Hamas, or that Hamas might try to escape into Sinai through these terror tunnels. So Israel has begun working on securing that. By doing that, they have also upped the ante. Hamas knows it's in its final hours, and they've been trying to bluff Israel into surrendering in Gaza rather than finishing them off. But now, as Israel just starts working its way forward and starts fighting and starts retaking parts of Rafah, number one, this is an objective that almost all Israelis support and agree on. Secondly, it puts enormous pressure on Hamas that if they keep stalling or saying yes to deals that don't exist, that haven't been negotiated, they're going to be hunted down and killed soon. Could Israel's beginning move into Rafah cause Hamas to come back to the table and let out hostages? Yeah, it could. And could Israel decide then to pause its fighting in Rafah to get those hostages out and accept for a limited temporary ceasefire? Yeah. And we pray that we can get all these hostages out one way or the other, but not with surrender. And I think Israel's done the right thing to start moving into Rafah. I think Israel's doing the right thing to set up huge tent cities and create places for the Palestinian civilians to go, to get out of harm's way, to get out of Rafah, and clearing the way for a full operation by Israel to finish Hamas off once and for all. That was more than I could get into this week's show. But I'm so grateful to have the YouTube channel that we can do sort of the extended DVD version of a very important and serious issue. Please keep praying that all the hostages are released, that God forces the Pharaoh of Gaza to let our people go, that God moves in power, in his supernatural power, to set all the captives free, and that God would bless Israel to crush Hamas once and for all with a minimum of civilian casualties. And please pray that the Lord gives Israel's leaders real wisdom to know how to care for and provide humanitarian relief for and enable that relief to come in the best and most effective way possible, so to care for Palestinians who are suffering and are caught in the crossfire between the evil, wicked terror masters in Gaza led by Hamas and Israel, who's trying to defend our country and liberate Gaza from sheer evil. Keep praying. It's not done yet, and there's a lot of twists and turns ahead. This is Joel Rosenberg for the Rosenberg Report and a YouTube exclusive right here from Jerusalem.